Share something.
I can use it.
I would have Will. I would have Will to the knowledge.
Back there is an hour.
It's just about to.
You got who you need back there staff-wise?
Yes, I do. Dr. Essex.
We need. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're back in session, and next on our agenda is the Healthy Responsible Students Committee, led by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, for this meeting, we have two items. We're going to be action item, then there'll be action on first read. But first of all, for the action item, we have the whole child NCF Hours Committee recommendations. We talked about that last month, and I think, can I go right ahead?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Suzanne Schmall, part of the Healthy Schools team. Good to be back before you. Let's see if I can get this down a little bit. I did bring some of the specialized instructional support handouts in case I think somebody had requested those, and just want to make sure folks had access to those. I don't know that I printed off enough for everybody, but we can bring more if we need to. So I'll make sure to get those around to you. But also just wanted to kind of reiterate the recommendation that was brought before you last month. And that really is focused around the specialized instructional support personnel. And that request is really to address the adequate funding request in terms of salaries needed and personnel, and again, that flexibility for districts to determine who's to be hired in those. And then really wanted to clarify, I think maybe there was a little bit of confusion, and I apologize for that, in terms of all the other information that was included. That was really just an orientation to what that advisory committee has identified as the priorities, and wanted to kind of just give you an overview of what those are going to be continuing to come forward. And again, those included around the principal preparation program, infrastructure support, and access to school-based health services. And so there's a lot more work the committee's going to do on all of those, but just wanted to let you know that those priorities had been identified. But I'll pause there and see what additional questions or comments folks might have.
Anyone? Well explained, Lord.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I will pass these around if anybody wants these, and make sure we get those. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And next, Allison, please come up for item 2.
Hello again.
Hello.
How are you today? I am here to present 5 new proposed members of the High School Interscholastic Athletics Appeal Board. Very proud to present some very exceptional people for this consideration and adoption by this board. We continue to try to get representation from each region, and right now we are recommending 2 former athletic directors who are retired, very storied careers. Bobby Guthrie from Wake County, who has been one of the leaders in this area for a very long time, and Ronnie Chavis from Robeson County, who, again, was an athletic director for 22 years, and Bobby Guthrie was 19 years in that position. I mean, if you look at their resumes, they're athletics from the start to the finish, and their resumes have been provided for you. And then 3 additional retired superintendents. Stuart Hobbs, who was the superintendent in Sampson, Stokes, and Yadkin counties, and has done some interim since then. I think he started out as the high school quarterback in Sampson County High School when he was in high school. So he's got a long career as an athletic, involved in athletics through many superintendencies. Kathy Spencer, who's the retired superintendent out of Onslow County. She was the superintendent down there for 7 years, ran a school district, very involved in athletics. And Jim Watson, who's a retired superintendent from Lincoln County, 6 years as a superintendent. And he now teaches at UNC Charlotte, but he volunteered to come do the Athletics Appeal Board. This will provide much needed relief to the 5 we've been using all year who are worn out because we've had like 15 appeals in the last year, and we need more people. So the goal is to get to 15. The only district that would not, the only education region that would not be represented with the addition of these 5 is District 8, and we'll try to find someone else there and try to get it up to 15 so that we have a good cross-section of people. Any questions about that? It's been an active group this year. There are a lot of appeals, and with the new legislation, it looks like there are going to be even more when parents and students can appeal. So, anything? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, that concludes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. We'll now move to Government and Community Affairs led by Mr. Wendell Hall. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along with others in this group, today we will present to you an item with 625 pages. So get ready to start reading. And of those 625 pages, 700 plus pages dealing with money issues that the General Assembly finally passed the state budget. And we're going to have Mr. Jamie Falkenberry is here with us today, who will give us an overview of some of those items that were funded, were not funded, and some items that were collapsed in. We're going to do this in about 30 minutes. So, put your reading glasses on and tighten up your seat belts, and we're going to fly through it. It's more details than what we're going to present. Ms. Falkenberg is going to present today concerning the new budget that we'll be working under effective the next school term. And there are some items that's already in place for this school term. Ms. Falkenberg, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Committee Chair, and thank you to the board for
30
this.
minutes.
My goal is to be out of here in 10, but my goal is to be out of here before that alarm goes off.
All right. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Which would be about 32 minutes, 33 minutes. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you. And just if we can go to the next slide. For the board, the budget became law yesterday. All of DPI's major policy bills became law. But as is the case at the end of any session, a lot of bills that were dormant for a while just start to move, and bills that were one thing become something completely different. And that is how we get computer science graduation requirement to be the vehicle for which the General Assembly address the teen porn epidemic in our state. So I'll explain that in a little bit, but I just want to make you aware that bills were flying and bills were moving, and bills became something that they weren't before. Right now, the General Assembly is currently having skeleton sessions. They might be back next week. They're focusing on redistricting. They had their regional meetings all throughout last week, I believe. And right now we're going through some technical fixes with the General Assembly and addressing some conference reports that are still out there. Many of the bills that were in conference reports, or that were in conference committee, I should say, were in the budget. So there will be some bills, if they do move, that will be bills that we might have seen before. They might be a collection of bills that were out there hanging. So we have not seen any of those, but if they move, they can also move them next short session as well. All right, so the budget highlights. And I just show you this tweet is we knew right away, as soon as the Senate passed it, there was some hesitation on if we should start working on the budget in preparation of it becoming law, not knowing what the governor might do, but the governor came out and immediately said that he will allow it to become law. So at that point, all the teams here at DPI, specifically in school business and in the government affairs division, started working with business owners and those employees at DPI to make sure that we're all on the same page and getting this massive document in order. Next slide. So as the committee chair said, the budget itself is 625 pages. The money report, which is also where they call the snappy language or all the line items in the budget, that is 786 pages. So all in all, the budget is over 1,400 pages of reading. So it is still taking us a lot of time to go through it, and every time you read the budget, you kind of see a new word pop up that you might not have noticed before. And so it is going to take some time for us to go through, and it's more of a disclaimer to all of our partners out in the district that DPI is doing the best that they can to help districts and principals and local superintendents with all the new provisions that are in there. Just give us some time to work through those. Also, with technical corrections that always happen after bills, there might be some changes, and hopefully if there are any changes, we see those in the next 2 weeks or so. And just in the education budget portion, there were 80 separate education budget line items. So those are all the different ones that school business has to go through to make their codes, to make sure that we have business owners to address in the money report. The overall education budget for this fiscal year, I should say 23-24, my apologies, is a little less than $13.5 billion, and the next fiscal year is a little less than $13.7 billion. Another thing to know as well is that, and I want to thank Ann Murtha on our team for all of her help with tracking down reports and being the report person for the department and the state board, is that there are more than 40 new reports that the DPI and the state board are responsible for. Some of these are changes to existing reports, and some of these are completely new reports. 8 of these new reports are due in the next 2 months. So by the end of December, we have to get them to the state board and to JLOC. And another thing I want to highlight is that, and I'm not going to go through every line item in the budget. I've sent links to the board, and we can go through it if you have questions about one-offs, but for time purposes, I do want to show also that we have 24 new IT projects in this budget. That adds on to the 20-plus IT projects DPI and State Board are already managing. And there were no additional FTEs for the IT department to help administer all of these. All right. So in this budget also, what I do want to say is that there weren't as many requests fulfilled this go-around as in years past. Part of that, I believe, is because we don't have as much of an influx in the federal money as we used to. Also, it was very apparent that the General Assembly, while they invested almost $170 million this year in teacher pay and then $300 million for the next biennium in teacher pay and for school construction, that sort of stuff, they really did invest billions of dollars in infrastructure projects around the state that are not education related, obviously. So you're dealing with sewage and roads for our ever-growing state. And a lot of district projects made this budget. So when we go to the education budget, a lot of the requests that were made were not reflected in here, but there were some priorities that were funded. And these are the ones I just want to quickly go by because I know these were of interest to the state board, is the elimination of the student copay for reduced price meals. This is something that the superintendent's been pushing since she's been in office, especially in the time when with inflation and parents, I lost my train of thought. Their circumstances change and fluctuate throughout the life of their child. We want to make sure that if you qualify for free and reduced lunch, that you get that money fully compensated. So what the General Assembly did is what was the request that came from the department and from the state board is please do this recurring, which is $3 million recurring, and because it's going to be roughly about $6 million this year, just because we have. That's the numbers that we've got from school nutrition. They gave us an additional $3 million non-recurring, and so each year we will go to the General Assembly and say, "This is how much we think it is on top of the $3 million," and they hopefully will continue to fund the non-recurring portion. The anonymous tip line also that was funded several budgets ago. The Center for Safer Schools was out of money at that point, and so the General Assembly did fund this. We can talk about this another time. And Center for Safer Schools has a lot of research, but this has really been a value added to the state, especially with the uptick in mental health crisis with our teens. Economics, personal finance, professional development was funded. They actually funded this $200,000 more per year than what we requested. So, which is great, and the one of 2 FTEs that we did receive was to the Office of Charter Schools as assistant director. We did get the pre-K early literacy assessment, so that all of our students, not just the ones that are run through DHHS, will be able to take the same similar assessment, so we know how they are coming into the K-12 system. As we discussed, I know the state board and the superintendent. Lieutenant Governor and Treasurer all were requesting and hoping for a 10% increase with the teacher pay. Unfortunately, it was 7.4% of an increase over the biennium. Principal pay, we did try to fix and we worked Dr. Green on this one, try to fix those swings that happen in principal pay. Which was going to be about $20 million. The General Assembly funded $14 million in increases. Needs-based capital grants. This is just a program that's been very beneficial to state. We're going to see over $250 million to this. But most importantly is that there were some provisions in there that protect the integrity of the program, and I'll talk about that in a minute. School safety grants, and what we're very pleased to see with the school safety grants this time around is that the General Assembly really made a concerted effort to make sure that districts were applying for mental health purposes as well, not just your hardening of the schools and getting cameras in there. And so there are specific provisions in there that address like the mental health and the school well-being, the well-being of the student. And those are going to be abilities for districts and schools to apply for those grants. And then the ATR, which you can't see on the screen because of the closed captioning, but the ATR bonuses were funded for the first time, which is a great thing for the state in that what the department and the state board, Pepsi, and all those involved in trying to change the compensation model for teachers, this is the first step towards that. And the General Assembly is taking an interest in what we are all doing, the hard work that's going on. And so they finally funded these bonuses for the teachers. There are still, there's no set plan for ATR yet, and I know we were trying to kind of guide that path of what compensation looks like, so it's more rigid. And so we will see. We'll continue to work with our General Assembly partners on this. What was not funded in the budget is we did receive 2 FTEs, but we were also mandated to, I believe it was at least 3 FTEs to reclassify them, reposition them with no funds that come for them. I know Shelby, our Chief of Staff, is working through that with HR. One of them, Dr. Oxendine, is for Native American Affairs, which we're very excited about, that we finally get that position back at DPI. And some others are for, I believe, school business and for Read to Achieve purposes, but we are going to have to figure out where to take that from somewhere else, which is unfortunate. Anything ESSER 3 related was not funded in the second year of this biennium that was done through this department so far. And that includes what you all heard earlier with the CARES coaches, OLR, or any other initiatives. We continue to have those with the General Assembly. I believe that they will address that once the next session comes around. But the funds don't go away till September 2024, so I believe that they felt they had more time to address and look into all the work that we're doing here. There was no PD for computer science for this fiscal year, but there is PD for computer science for the following fiscal year, and which we're going to continue to talk to them about. Just so you all know, is that when the General Assembly gave the department a computer science division 2 years ago, they did build in a professional development fund into the budget for the computer science division, but the need and the request was about a little over $1 million per year through 2025, so we can get all of our middle school and high schools to have a qualified computer science teacher. So we'll look at ways to navigate that going forward. There's no statewide PD money for teachers, as the superintendent mentioned before lunch. Several IT projects and initiatives that were not funded. The email threat detection was funded at $5 million, which is one of I think 4 or 5 requests that we made. And there were additional requirements without funding, especially on the research side and the reporting and duties. As I mentioned before, we have 40 plus new reports that are going to be due, and just the burden that puts on an already strained workforce here at the department. We're going to continue to have those conversations with the GA going forward. Also, a nurse in every school is something that we all advocated for. There was roughly a 10% increase in the budget for districts to hire a nurse, recruit a nurse, but they lumped all that in together, and I'll talk about it in a minute. I'm not going to go through all these, so don't worry. I just want to show you the breadth of what the government affairs team has to kind of keep track of and what the things that we've been advocating for on behalf of the department and the board. These are just some of the 30, 40 provisions, special provisions that were in the budget. These are all the ones that we helped navigate through the process. As you'll see on there, career development plans is on there. We all know that was a standalone bill. And DPI funding in arrears, which Jennifer Bennett and Alexis will be more than happy to talk to you about. But all these are very positive provisions that were in the budget. But I did want to highlight, if you go to the next slide, a few that just would stick out. And so first one is the needs-based capital fund changes section. What we've been dealing with ever since coming out of the pandemic and increases in inflation is that costs for schools have gone up. Or at least that's what the schools are telling us. So they apply for a certain amount of money, and then they come back and say, we need more. So the General Assembly has increased the amount of funding over the years, and now there's a max of $62 million for high school, $52 for middle, and $42 for an elementary school. But what happens is a lot of these schools sometimes sit on the funds and wait for the cost to go down, and then the costs keep going up. So the General Assembly said in this now is you get 2 years to build the school. If you don't build the schools, the money goes back to the department and they will appropriate out. Now the superintendent is allowed to give a 1-year extension for extenuating circumstances, which we will work through and notify districts on what those might be. But also there's been situations where districts have applied for funding and then they say, oh, well, we said we had this amount in local funding. Oh, we only have, we had 10 million, now we only have 5 million. So now this protects the department and the taxpayers and everybody and the integrity of the program, where you have to be truthful on your application all the way through. So that way the funds go to those that most need it, and so we know what type of applications we're really looking at. The next one, supplemental funding in low wealth counties. I'm going to let school business handle the meat of all that's involved in this, but what I did want to just bring to everybody's attention is there were a handful of schools that for whatever reason did not follow the law as was written the last go around, and we worked with the GA to say, hey, this is the first year that this really got rolled out. Please hold them harmless, and that's what they did. So everybody's held harmless. I know some of you represent districts or regions that have those districts. You can tell them that this provision's in there, hold harmless, just please follow the law going forward, because I don't see the General Assembly doing a hold harmless again for this. Prohibition against 3Qing. This was never a standalone bill. This actually showed up in the Senate budget, but the superintendent was very supportive of it, and if we are going to ensure that we're doing the science of reading and good practices, then we need to ensure that those are the type of the ways that all of our teachers are teaching throughout the state. And then some other ones I know that were of interest to the state board, and you already know this because Allison has done a great job crafting these policies, but this is the paid parental leave to ensure that when a teacher goes from one district to another, that they are still, their time served does not go away. We felt that this was very important, so did many members of the General Assembly, but furthermore, I highlighted it, and it really doesn't show up on your screen that well. But what this highlighted section is also for charter schools that don't opt in, we felt that teachers need to know before they go into that charter school. So charter schools are now required to inform candidates that they do not offer this opportunity to them. So that way they don't show up and say, wait, I thought I had this opportunity. All right. And then this one, which I'm very thankful that the General Assembly brought back and been working with Julie Pittman and others on this, and I put the quote from the Insider every day that has like a quote of the day, and I actually made it a year ago, but it was on this actual topic, is I was talking about we're just leaving money on the table because the TAs, the teachers, they limited it to only a finite amount of districts that could access it and only a certain amount each district could get. So each year that we were reverting money back when we had Robinson County being one that says we could max out and get all that money. So what they do now is they are going to they're going to still keep the priority of the original districts, but then there's going to be the opportunity for other districts to apply as funds become available, which is great. So this will open it up to the entire state. And this is very small. I just wanted to tell you that these are the special provisions for the Parents' Bill of Rights that were in the budget, and I know Allison has discussed this all with you as well, but just to be very clear, because what was reported in the media was that the superintendent and state board officials were asking for the Parents' Bill of Rights to be punted, for the entire law to be punted, and that was never the case. There were very specific provisions, specifically about some of the reporting. And at the top one that's in the blue circle, I don't believe we actually requested this one, but this has to do with security cameras and collecting data from security cameras, so that made it in there. But the next three are the ones that the department advocated for. The first one that's in red, that's circled, is for the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Because it is an anonymous survey that there is no identifiable student data to it, the General Assembly agreed that should not have to be an opt-in, but rather an opt-out. But there is still a requirement in this that parents must be notified that this is happening to give the parents the opportunity to opt out, which is very good. We didn't want to leave millions of dollars on the table by students not being able to take this important survey. The next one is the medical care for students, especially in emergencies. I don't remember who it is, but someone on this side of the aisle was very concerned about that, and we were too, to make sure that if a kid is having a reaction to a bee sting or has a heart attack, that you can address it. So the General Assembly did clarify that, so that teachers do not need to feel that, or administrators for that matter, need to feel threatened that someone will come after them for giving life-saving attention to a student. And then on the right side, circled in yellow, are all the minimal date changes to reporting and requirements. Specifically, the one for the state board is I believe it's number 6 or 7, where the state board and DBI have to collect all the instances that happen at the local level, as well as the board policies. That was punted to September of 2024. The original date was this September, and obviously the law just come into effect. So I've talked a lot. Is there any questions, or should I just keep rolling? Keep rolling. Okay. All right. And then there's 2 I did want to flag for the state board. The General Assembly did, for all intents and purposes, eliminate the driver's education division here at DPI, and they left it so that there could be one person to kind of manage the funds that go through. Just flagging that for all of you. And then the limit discretion to withhold the reduced charter school funding. The General Assembly clarified what the criteria is for withholding charter school funding. Now, here are some other provisions that have that I think you all have been pinged on, and I believe this was discussed at SLA this morning. The original Opportunity Scholarship Bill was called Choose Your School, Choose Your Future, which was passed by the Senate. The House actually amended out the section that I'm going to discuss, and then it showed back up in the Senate budget. But this is what everybody's telling about, is limiting the locals to only 22 hours. What it does is actually limits the locals to providing the amount of hours that the state board authorizes. So the state board still has the ability to go above the 22 hours. Actually, I'm skipping ahead, which would be the next page. So I'll just explain real quick. With the Opportunity Scholarships, I think you all are pretty aware of all that's involved. That's open to the general public now. You don't have to be in public school. But there is this report right here that says the obligation of non-public schools accepting eligible students receiving scholarship grants. In here, it discusses the test that shall be administered to all eligible students enrolled in grades 3 and higher. And also, there's another provision in here that puts the superintendent, with the consultation of the superintendent, to discuss with the authority who manages all the money on what that assessment might be for grades 3 and 8. So we'll give you updates throughout the year on the progress of that. The next slide is just the breakdown of the Opportunity Scholarship money, which was very similar, if not exactly the same, from what we saw before. And then this is what I jumped ahead. This is the 22 hours, what I was discussing before, that have all the rules. And Allison's working all this, and so we're also talking with General Assembly about looking at ways of finessing this so that we still do what's best for students going forward. Also what you need to know is if a student decides to leave high school after their junior year, after 3 years, there is going to be a scholarship program for them so that they can use the money that they would have been attached to them in the district to be used to go to a community college or to a university. And only those students who were in public high school have access to that. So private school and homeschool families would not. It's only for your fourth year if you were going to stay. And then finally, in the last slide for this section, in the Opportunity Scholarship Impact Report Reinvestment in Public Schools, I'm just going to read the highlight section. They say it is the intent of the General Assembly to reinvest in public schools any savings realized by the state each year. And so that will be developed, I assume, over the coming year. In policy, just so everybody is on the same page, opportunity scholarships where the cap is lifted on who can apply for them and whatnot doesn't go into effect until next school year. So this is the General Assembly stating that they're looking at ways to fund public education through savings that the Opportunity Scholarship might bring to the state. Okay, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Here's all the bills that we've been monitoring. You all have seen these slides before, but I've just updated to let you know. Career development plan legislation was in the budget. However, it was without funding. So we're talking with the General Assembly about creative ways how we can at least fund it through the pilot phase of this year. So we're ready to hit the ground running the following school year when this is fully implemented for the state. Also, healthy students, as I already discussed, a nurse in every school was not in the budget. There was about a 10% increase for if districts wanted to hire a nurse with those funds. What the General Assembly did this go around, though, is and I know Mr. Hall has been requesting this for years, is they lumped in all the funds together for social workers, school psychologists, all school support staff are now in one pot of money that will allow them the flexibility at the local level to hire who they want to hire at the district level. House Bill 8, as I was talking about earlier, computer science graduation requirement. This bill moved the day before the last day of session, and when it moved in the Senate, they added several amendments to it. One was about accreditation at higher education, which has nothing to do with K-12. And then they also added on a provision that would have age verification for watching pornography. Never thought you would see that lumped in a computer science bill, but like I said before, that's what happens at the end of session. Bills kind of get lumped together. It did pass both chambers, and the governor did sign it into law. So the Computer Science Division and CTE and all those folks are hitting the ground running with that. Protect Our Students Act remained an agency bill. They added on one date change amendment in there that has nothing to do with State Board and DPI, and that was signed into law as well. Register nurses in schools. This was not in the budget. I know on our committee call we thought that there was something in the budget. There was something else for nurses. So, Mr. Hall, we're still working on this, and I'm talking with the bill sponsors to see what we can do, especially in the short session. And then threat assessment teams. This, as you all know, became law earlier in session, but the funding was in the budget. And then principal licensure became law. 500 hours remained the same, and it's up to 500 hours, so it's up to the State Board to decide on if they want to go above and beyond that. And then bills that were not moving for a while and then get lumped into another bill. There was a Department of Insurance law bill, and when the House actually had their session, it was a Thursday a couple weeks ago, and Computer Science and Protect Our Students Act both got past the chamber, and I was on my way to bed, and then around 11 o'clock they introduced a conference report that had the revised high school athletics attached to this bill. The Democrat Party, because there's a rule, said that, well, this needs to go to committee, and so they had a rules committee around 11:15 at night, and then they got it out of committee and then voted on 11:30. So it was a surprise. This bill is not a surprise, but the way it moved, it was a surprise, and that I thought this would be something they would address in the short session. But just so everybody is clear, and if you could tell anyone who is concerned about this law, it doesn't go into effect until next June or until next July 1. And so there is still time to work with our General Assembly partners, but also to work with all the work that State Board has done. The biggest thing now is high school athletics will be under the state superintendent other than the State Board. But nothing changes this school year. And then teacher licensure changes. We've been monitoring these bills that would allow for limited license to be renewable and for reciprocity to teachers from out of state. Both of these provisions made in the budget. I'm sure Dr. Tomberlin will have some policies ready to go for you soon. And then virtual charter schools. This is another bill that we were monitoring as a reminder to all of you. This passed the House and then went to the Senate. And the Senate added in that the General Assembly has to confirm the community college president. And then the chambers went to conference with this. But with this, I believe the community college president provision is in the budget too, but the remote virtual charter academy is in there as well. For what you all need to know is that they extended the virtual charter pilot for another year. I believe OCS has already contacted those schools to let them know they don't have to go through the renewal process. And then also CSRB will approve them, but there's also a minimum that 2 virtual charter schools exist in the state, but that doesn't mean it has to be the 2 virtual pilots that are now charter schools themselves can offer a virtual education. So that is in there. All right. And then the final thing is the constitutional amendment has not moved, and but that would be a short session thing at this point, I would assume. So try to go through that as fast as possible.
Okay.
Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. Any questions concerning this budget issue?
One little question way back on page 7. In the school safety grants, you said that it included money to address mental health issues,
Yes.
but it's non-recurring, right?
It has been non-recurring for a few years now.
So how are you going to address mental health issues with non-recurring funds? You just,
If you want to talk about
what would that look like?
It's training and education for teachers through the Center for Safer Schools.
Oh, okay, all right, so
It's
it's,
not positions.
so
Not salaries.
yeah, not something.
no, just giving teachers more training on how to deal with
And-
issues in their classrooms.
Well, it's mental health, first aid
Student
training,
mental
suicide prevention risk for any school support personnel who are in the building, as well as opportunities to come to Samarkand, which is the temporary training facility that the Center for Safer Schools is using. And then also convenings with both local law enforcement and districts so that they can partner around
Right,
the
so
threat
no-
assessment and the mental health.
So no new positions, but
No,
even
correct,
training
no.
for the folks who are already there. Does that include teachers or just support services?
Anyone that the school wants, yeah.
Thank you.
And if I could add to that, as being part of the review committee that last year that went through all these applications, they're very detailed. And I know that Karen Fairley, who's the director of Center for Safer Schools, has put a real big emphasis on the mental health aspect of this and not just buying computers and wands and metal detectors. So I'm very thankful that the GA has seen this and has seen the work that they're doing to prioritize this, and now they've even incentivized it even more by listing it out in the budget.
One last question.
I'm just curious, I'm sorry.
I'm talking, who already got? Ms. Duncan next.
The elimination of the driver's education section, was that something that had been discussed over time, or how did that happen?
So the first time we saw the provision, I believe, was in the House budget, and it wasn't in the Senate budget. What the reality is that more than 60% of our districts contracted out. So the money goes to the districts, and they just use a vendor to do it. About 40% of our districts do rely on the expertise, or did rely on the expertise of the department. I can't make assumptions on why the General Assembly did it. We advocated that they not do this, particularly because none of our schools of ed or community colleges offer professional development anymore to train driver's ed teachers. So I don't know where districts are going to get that professional development when the department was the one that was holding that water. So it will be interesting. Some states do this. We will see what happens.
Ms. Fairchild Duncan.
Thank you. Although I have several questions, I'm knocking down a short list.
Well, we got 10 minutes till the alarm goes off.
On the ESSER 3 funds that were up there, do you know what the status of and I maybe should ask you this, Superintendent, what the status of the potential waiver is for those funds to be able to use for an additional 14 months?
So we're working on that with federal programs right now. What we do know is that the USED will not allow those funds to be used for salaries.
For the extended fund?
Correct.
And I believe the
anyone-
services have to be rendered as well. So
Right.
you couldn't front load the payment and pay for a service for an additional year or two.
So second, I'm sure everyone in the room knows, but I'll be the one to confess I don't. What is 3Qing?
Holding.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm going to let the expert on this for the department. Yes.
3Qing is a euphemism for a type of early literacy instruction that is most frequently associated with whole language. It has to do specifically with the way teachers work with small groups or individual students when they are struggling readers, so when they are learning to read. So for example, I might ask you to use context clues to figure out what the word means, or to look at a picture and guess what the word means, or what the word is based on the context clues on the page. So if I show you a picture of a horse and it says the word horse underneath it, and I say to a 5-year-old, what do you think this word says? And she says, I don't know. And the teacher says, well, what is this a picture of? And the child says, pony. Well, that looks nothing like horse. And what we've known for the last 40 years is that that's not how the brain learns to read. And so because 3Qing has been the dominant form of curricular materials used in the United States for the last 4 decades, there is a movement to ban this practice because not only is it ineffective, it's also detrimental to a child's progress in learning to read, and it sits in opposition to the science of reading professional development that we have given our teachers and that our teachers have given so much of themselves to complete.
Thank you. Second to last question, did you, on behalf of either the state board or the department, oppose the provision that came into play in the budget very late with respect to funding charter schools?
No, I didn't see the budget. I didn't see that till it was filed, till it was came out.
And the last question is, was there any discussion at the legislature?
You talk about the one, scroll down. You talk about the, I'll answer that. As I discussed with Allison, is I think she even asked, like, do you think the General Assembly will address this? And I said, I would assume, since they're still in session, that they might address it. But I did not lay eyes on this until it came out of the budget, or until the budget was leaked that Monday night.
Last question, did you hear any discussion, or was there any discussion with respect to approving the virtual charters in light of the academic results they have achieved up until this point in time for the automatic renewal, or the justification for an automatic renewal?
What was the question again? Sorry.
Did you hear any discussion in the legislature as to the justification for renewing the virtual charters, given their academic performance now historically over 6 or 7 years?
I'm going back in my memory bank, and I think Representative Elmore ran this bill. If it wasn't him, I'm sorry. But when they discussed this on the House floor, they said that because of the influx of the amount of students that they've gotten that are kind of transient, especially during COVID, I believe they wanted them to have more of a time to work with those kids, because a lot of these kids chose virtual education when because of the pandemic and when schools were shut down. I do believe that one of the schools did see an increase, the other one maybe went down over last year, and I think that was even reflected at a recent meeting. But yeah.
Mr. Hallman, can I make a comment?
Sure.
Please? So I have historically shared the same concerns as you share, Duncan, and I had the opportunity this past year to, I'm not sure who organized the summit, but we did have a summit last year here at the department where about 100 families showed up of students who are in one of the two virtual schools. And I would just encourage anyone who questions these schools to look very carefully at the population that these schools are serving. I was shocked to see how many students were medically fragile, how many students had needs that for one reason or another could not be met in a non-virtual setting. And I just left with a better understanding. I left those meetings with a better understanding of who these schools are serving and why these children struggle academically the way that they do. These are students who are traveling to other cities to receive specialized medical care because that type of medical care is not available in our state, or they have other extenuating circumstances that make traditional face-to-face instruction not an option for them.
That caused me to just ask one
Yes,
last
sir.
question. What is the new capacity limits for each of these virtual?
I'll have to
schools?
double check, but
I
see it changed from the House and the Senate version, but I believe in the budget when it went to the House bill that allowed for them to go back to what the General Assembly allowed during COVID. So
It was
there,
about 3,500 per school, as I recall.
I mean, the numbers in my head are 2,800 and 1,000, I think is what their requests were to the state board, and then the General Assembly allowed that. So I'll have to double check with OCS, but I think that's what was in the version that was in the budget. But I'll have Ashley get it to you.
Anything else from anyone? Quickly, small county supplemental funding.
Mm-hmm.
Was that increased? Was that still there?
Yeah.
They did add another.
I think there was like 4. Alexis isn't here right now, but I think they included about 47 million, or I think it was around. Oh, Jennifer, didn't they include like $50 million?
Yeah, the formula was modified, and there'll be one additional school that receives small county funding.
Okay. All right, so there'll be,
Yes.
anyway, another school district added.
Yes.
Okay. Low wealth funding, was that at level? Is that, where did that come out of that? Low wealth funding?
Stayed the same.
That's, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. James. Anybody else? Mr. Chairman, that concludes our meeting today.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Right on time.
Perfect.
We're joined to 2:30. 2:30.
That's the thing. Right on time.
Good afternoon. We're back in session, and next on our agenda is the Educator Standards and Practice Committee, led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine. I chair this committee, and joining me in that responsibility, leadership responsibility, is Dr. Donna Tipton-Rogers. The first item on the agenda is an action on first reading. It's ES&P 1, and this is a very, very important report that comes to us annually, and it's on the evaluation of the advanced teaching roles. We've even spoke about that initiative today, and we look to this report to kind of educate us and help us answer some questions, important questions, along the way as we move forward with the pathways to excellence. So everything that we learned from this particular report, this evaluation is very critical to next steps. So coming forward is Dr. Tomberlin. Dr. Tomberlin will introduce the researchers who will walk us through the particulars of this report. Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Good afternoon, board members. So today we will be presenting the evaluation report for the Advanced Teacher Roles program in the state. Just to remind you, that Advanced Teaching Roles has been started out as a pilot in 2018, so we're in our sixth year of implementation, and this report is a legislative requirement, an annual reporting requirement, and I am happy to introduce to you Dr. Lam Pham, Assistant Professor of Education Policy at the North Carolina State University, and Ms. Sarah Bossell, Research Scholar at the Friday Institute, and they will be presenting the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sarah Bossell, and I'm a researcher from the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation at North Carolina State. I'm here today with my colleague, Dr. Lam Pham, who's an assistant professor in the College of Ed, and we will be sharing findings from our mixed methods evaluation. Slide, please. Though there are just two of us here today, we represent a large team with a diverse set of expertise. Our team is led by Dr. Sean Kellogg. Sean sadly could not be here with us today due to a prior commitment. However, he is enthusiastic about this work and eager to dialogue with all of you in the future. Next slide, please. And again. We have offered a report that synthesizes a lot of information about context for ATR, methodology, as well as findings. But today, for the purpose of this brief presentation, I will begin by offering a brief overview of the evaluation. I will walk us through some implementation findings, share the floor with Lam to walk us through some high-level impact findings, and finally, offer some recommendations. So first, goals. There are three primary goals for Advanced Teaching Roles program. The first is to allow highly effective classroom teachers to reach an increased number of students. To do so, the second goal is to enable local school administrative units to create innovative compensation models. And finally, the third goal is to produce measurable improvements in student outcomes. Slide, thank you. The nature of our evaluation was broad in scope. ATR has seen tremendous growth since its pilot phases. Because of that growth, we wanted to do two things. We wanted to assess all the ways that it's being implemented across the state so as to be able to identify mechanisms of support and barriers to support. We also wanted to study program impacts. What you see here is a map of AT award winners, PSUs. I'll note that there are some PSUs that have received funding from NCDPI that are no longer implementing the program. They are not included in our evaluation. I also want to signal the fact that even though these PSUs are represented via a saturated color, that should not signal to you that all PSUs are implementing the program at all of their schools. Additionally, they may start the program at different schools at different times. I'm going to talk briefly about the data that we use to answer our eval questions, as well as some of the limitations that we'd like you to keep in mind for the study. To answer our evaluation questions, we analyzed a set of NCDPI administrative records for both educators and students. Sample sizes for all data sources are depicted on your screen. We conducted extensive interview with PSU leaders. We also visited schools across the state, conducting focus groups with teachers who hold these advanced roles, focus groups with teachers receiving support from those holding these roles. We conducted observations of advanced teachers in action. We distributed surveys for these teachers who may not have been reflected in the sample for site visits. Two limitations that we want to highlight today that are important to consider. First, the quantitative analysis on student impact is limited to school-level data based on data that was available to us at the time of this evaluation. Secondly, as is true with all qualitative data, you want to keep in mind representativeness. These findings are not generalizable. Rather, they reflect trends, patterns across the folks who participated in the study. Let's get to some implementation details. Next slide, please. At a high level, PSUs tend to collaborate with external partners to design and implement ATR. No matter the origin of the model, there is a high level of customization. So while some PSUs develop their model based on in-house talent and knowledge, others contract with a third party to develop that. Even in the third party instance, their models are tweaked to meet their district needs. Go back up. Thank you. There are two sort of broad categories that we can think about for advanced teachers. The first are those that expand their impact by coaching a smaller team of teachers. The second is an advanced teacher that expands their impact by teaching more students. Even though we have two broad categories, the variation is palpable with over 24 job titles across those two categories. If we drill down even further, we see even more variation at the school level that might include release time afforded to these teachers to fulfill their duties and focus of support. I'll walk you through that point. In School A, advanced teachers may focus on a school grade level. School B, advanced teachers may focus on a discipline. And at School C, it might be a combination. Finally, across the state, PSU leaders are comfortable and confident with their hiring protocols, but they're still grappling with how to best and most efficiently evaluate the individuals in these roles. Next slide, thank you. What you see here is an illustration of some of that variation that I just spoke about. Respondents on our survey who hold advanced teaching roles self-reported that they fulfill regularly the 5 legislatively prescribed roles in any given week. And this includes providing in-house PD, leading whole school efforts, serving as a classroom teacher, teaching more students, or serving as an instructional coach. The takeaway here, their work is complex, it's fast-paced, and it touches much of the school population. Next slide. Thank you. In terms of equitable access, ATR schools across the state tend to serve larger proportions of racially minoritized and economically disadvantaged students. ATR has improved access to highly effective teachers for students that attend Title I and/or historically hard-to-staff schools. And importantly, administrators reported that as a whole, ATR is a strategy that supports PSU equity goals. Next slide. I want to talk briefly about some barriers and supports to continued growth and implementation. First and foremost, PSU leaders are the driving force behind this program. They are the designers, they are the implementers, and they are the advocates. We have learned from our work with them that there are 3 barriers that are really important to keep into mind. First, variable funding structures have impacted the growth of the program. Second, PSU and school-level administrators talked about teacher turnover challenges as having a direct impact on the program this year. And finally, some district and school-level administrators emphasized that class size flexibility, which is an affordance in the NCDPI grant award, is crucial for continued implementation. I'll leave you with this thought before we move over to Dr. Pham for impact findings. The interesting thing about ATR is that the strength is also a challenge. The individualized planning process allows district to create models that meet their district needs and data, but that also results in a great deal of variation, resulting in some unique challenges for evaluation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So before I get into the impact findings, I wanted to just take just a minute, if you allow me, to talk a little bit technically about how we did the impact evaluation using the data. So using North Carolina's administrative data, we looked at school-wide achievement, and it's a growth model in terms of, we looked at the school before and after implementing ATR and compared that before-after growth to a similar set of schools that did not implement ATR. So we compared that before-after growth to a non-implementing set of schools. Now, as Sarah mentioned earlier, there's ATR is quite complex. So there's multiple components to this model. There's a school-wide component that I see as being things like changing the school schedule so that teachers can meet together and speak together. So that's a type of school-wide intervention as part of the model. There's other kind of school-wide components as well, for example, changing the culture of the school. These are school-wide components. But due to various very legitimate limitations, things like resources not being available and not having human capital, a lot of these ATR schools could not scale up in the entire school. So you have some students in the school that are taught by an ATR's teachers and some that are not. So that happens in some of these ATR schools as well. So in an ideal world, we would be able to send and bring forward to you both sets of analyses, one where we look at the school-wide growth and one where we look at the growth within school, comparing students who had an ATR teacher to students who didn't. However, and I promise you, after months of working very hard to get these data, we were not able to obtain the within-school data, and that's something that we're working very hard to obtain for this upcoming year. So I'd like for everyone to sort of see these impact results as being one side of the coin, one half of what we want to be able to do eventually. And once we are able to look within school, there's every chance that we could see even larger effects than what I'm showing you today. So here's a set of key qualitative findings. I'll go through them in order in just a minute, but I will say just very quickly that I'm going to talk to you today about student test scores, teacher retention, and school working conditions. And just a note on student test scores, our test scores are based on end of course and end of grade exams, and so, for example, K2 students are not included in this kind of analysis. Next slide, please. As for student achievement, so you can see on the graph here, we've looked at student achievement in 3 subjects, ELA, math, and science, and we find positive and statistically significant effects in math, but not in ELA. In science, we see positive effects, but the result is not statistically significant, so all the training I've had, I'm going to say that's inconclusive, and we need more data to know about what's going on with science. As for the math result, that effect size that you see on the graph there is equivalent to what other studies have benchmarked as being an additional month of learning. So what we're saying here is the before-after growth in ATR schools compared to comparison schools is about a month of additional growth in math for students in these schools. I also want to note that the fact that we don't find a statistically significant effect in ELA is quite in line with previous research in other states and other models, because in general, it does seem to, from the research perspective, take longer to improve students' reading ability to decode text and so forth. Another thing that we did was to separate this out by cohort. So as Sarah shared earlier, different PSUs began and different schools began at different times. So some schools began in the 2017-18 school year and every year after that up to 21-22, the last year of our data. And as you can see in this graph, that first cohort, so the cohort that has had 5 years of implementation experience, and that began in that first year, and there's only a few districts that were in that first cohort, are the main drivers of the positive effects that we see in math. And so it looks from this particular analysis like the longer the time that these districts have to implement ATR, the stronger the math effect that we see. Another interpretation, however, is that there is something different about that first cohort, those first set of schools that began a longer time ago. And so that's something that we want to explore and bring more evidence to sort of tease out those different explanations for you later. Another thing we did, just to kind of put that into a more direct light, is to look at year by year. So here, year 1 is the first year the school began ATR. Year 2 is the second year, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't align with calendar years. But what you can see here is that in the first year, we don't see much of an effect in math. But once you get to the second year and then forward, it fluctuates a little bit, I will admit, in this graph. However, we do see that the effect tends to and looks like it's increasing across time. More evidence to suggest that this model seems like the kind of model that needs at least 1 year of implementation in the school before we start being able to detect these effects. Again, this is focused on math, and we do not see these kinds of trends in ELA. When we turn to teacher retention, we look at teacher retention in a few different ways. And by teacher retention and turnover, I'm looking at it as whether or not the teacher has moved to a different school in North Carolina versus whether or not the teacher has completely left North Carolina. So they may have left teaching, they may have moved to a charter school, or they may have left the state. And either one. So leave the school for any reason. The teacher has left the school. And we, in fact, find no evidence of a change in teacher retention or turnover in ATR schools. So at least at the school level, it does not seem like the ATR program is changing teacher retention. And finally, I'll note here we used teacher working conditions survey to look at working conditions in the school as reported by teachers in these schools. And as you can see from the bar graphs, a lot of positive numbers, although they are not consistently statistically significant. I'll note there's one number that looks like it's negative, but that number is a need for support. So what the ATR teacher is telling us is they have less need for support in the ATR school, suggesting they have sufficient need. And then just to add to the quantitative impact findings, I want to talk through just a few qualitative impact findings based on educators' perceptions in these schools. First is that they feel recognized and valued. Having this advanced role is something that makes a teacher think of themselves as being someone who has been recognized as someone who can be a leader in their school. The teachers who are supported by advanced teachers talk about how they are able to teach more effectively and have learned a lot from the supports they get from their lead teacher. There's a sense of togetherness in the school in terms of, we are working together to solve these problems of practice. And ATR school leaders have told us that this strategy really supports their ability to recruit teachers into their school. The idea that we have a career ladder here, we have chances for the teacher to advance while remaining in the classroom, and of course opportunities for increased pay as well. And then various different stakeholders have talked about this program building a culture of continuous improvement. So the fact that teachers are working together has really led to this idea of we will continue to improve our school. And so unlike the qualitative findings, these qualitative findings are more focused on educators and their perceptions and what they think about the program, but we think it's quite important that educators are thinking so positively about ATR. Next slide, please. So we have two kind of big buckets of recommendations for this body here and the department more generally. The first is just around the program itself. So recommendations for improving ATR. The first is to better communicate and more clearly communicate and perhaps put some guardrails around how we define these different roles. As Sarah talked about, there's so many different ways that schools and districts are thinking about what is an advanced leader. And that flexibility is a part of the model. However, it makes it somewhat difficult to communicate to a new teacher coming in. You're an advanced teacher. What does that mean? What does that mean for what you are going to do day to day in the school? Teachers are also very adamantly told us that they need time to really focus on their leadership work, right? So eliminating these non-essential duties that to the teacher's perspective are not supporting their ability to support other teachers. And that leads into the second point around professional development. Teachers have often said, even in the advanced role, having supports and resources and PD to do a good job of leading other teachers is an important part of what they need. We also want to mention funding in terms of the ability to sustain this program requires funding to do things like pay teachers and to continue to keep the program's gears in line. And so that's something for this body, legislature, department to really think about. And then to ensure equitable access to this program, as Sarah mentioned, this program tends to serve schools that serve more racially minoritized and economically disadvantaged students. So equitable access to AATR, I think, can really be thinking about things like the district's equity plans and school improvement plans and how this program might be leveraged in those types of plans. And then my favorite part, just if you hear me out, the last slide is on just recommendations to help us do a better job next time. And the big one for us is systematic data collection. Like I mentioned earlier, we can give you half of the coin. What is the school-wide effect of these things? We would like to have the other part of this, which is what is the effect on students and teachers who are actually working in the ATR program. And to do that, we need data from these schools and PSUs and are working with DPIs and PSUs to be able to report and get those data. There are other data issues that I'd love to tell you about, but I'm sure you don't want to hear. So I will move on. I would just say common data reporting is something we care very much about. And the last kind of recommendation that we have for evaluation moving forward is in-depth case studies. So as you will probably guess, there is wide variation in how schools and districts are implementing the program. And as such, there are certainly schools and districts that are doing quite well in terms of producing strong student achievement and teacher outcomes. And we would, as an evaluation team, really love to be able to bring forward what strategies those schools are using. Last slide, please. And as we said earlier, we are happy to answer any questions now. And our principal investigator, Dr. Sean Kellogg, is quite happy to answer questions over email. His email is right there if anyone is interested in following up after this meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now I'll turn it over for any questions or comments from the board members, my colleagues. I see out of the corner of my eye, Superintendent Truitt has her hand up.
I have two quick questions. The first one is you mentioned that, first of all, thank you so much. I mean, this was just fantastic and really excited to have something to hold on to help make this program better now that we have the appropriation. So you mentioned teacher retention. I heard you say it didn't impact teacher retention. Does that mean it didn't impact it on either end? Teachers, did it lead to, do we know if it left to teachers staying at least in their district? You're saying it didn't cause them to leave. Did it help them stay?
So we do not find that, again, at the school level, teachers are staying in their school. So and we're looking at both. So they could move to another school, which means they could move to another school in the same district or another school in a different district. Mm-hmm. We saw no effect on that. We saw no effect on their leaving the state either. So in general, my answer is no. We're not seeing a change in them staying, leaving from these schools.
Okay. And then my other question was, did you, I probably already know the answer, but did you look at any sort of qualitative impact of morale in the school? Like, for example, one criticism we hear all the time of these kinds of differentiated staffing models is that it creates a culture of competition amongst the schools. Is that something that, I've not seen that personally in ATR schools. I've seen younger, grateful teachers grateful for the mentorship, but I'm just curious what you saw.
Yeah, I heard qualitative, so I'm going to sit down.
Thank you for the question. Actually, our qualitative data, by and far, points to the opposite. We did not see substantial evidence that teachers are feeling a greater sense of competition or are feeling demoralized by this program. Instead, they're feeling greatly supported by the program. Anecdotally, we heard from young first-year teachers who say they now have a different goal to one day serve in this role as well. So it seems to be helping teachers think about their career in longevity terms, which is pretty exciting.
Very exciting, thank you.
Okay, and I see a question, okay.
Were there consistent criteria used to choose the teachers? And is that shared anywhere in your report?
Absolutely. Yeah, we go into depth in the report about that. Typically, districts are identifying teachers based on their EVOS data. And there's also a host of other factors that they look at. Sometimes there's a panel interview or scenarios that they need to respond to. But that part is pretty agreed upon at this stage.
Are there other questions? Ms. Kamnitz?
Given the variation in all these programs, it seems to me it's going to be really hard to get at a key question, which is which of these mini models is the most effective in terms of increasing student achievement and all the things we're trying to solve with this program. Is there any way we can ever get to that? I mean, until we, without standardizing it? I don't suppose there is. I'm just
Sure.
Do you want to take that, Lynn?
So everybody's coming to the mic.
we got some.
We're rushing the field now from that question. So that's a great question. And so this evaluation looks at ATR as a program across the entire state. So that may be beyond the scope of that. But I am working with folks, some folks from the Friday Institute and other researchers on federal grants that would allow us to do that very thing. Like we look at what aspects of the programs seem to be having the greatest impact, and can we standardize? Can we standardize the way we implement these models, the organizational structure? Can we standardize the selection criteria for ATR? We just don't know right now which one's the better one, and so we do need to study those detailed aspects of the program.
Well, and to Ms. Jones' question too, you can use EVOS data in the selection process, which you can use EVOS data if a teacher has it, but the other question is how do you, when you're outside of EVOS, which goes back to pathways and how do we measure teacher effectiveness? But I mean, that is
Yes.
an inherent problem.
So that is a question that we're tying back to pathways and how ATR can be leveraged to help us understand qualitative, rigorous but qualitative measures of teacher effectiveness that will allow us to identify these highly effective teachers who don't have EVOS scores. That's right.
Okay, other questions? Chair Davis?
So is it correct to say that the analysis that you did in terms of student outcomes was based on the performance of all students in a school that's receiving ATR teachers as opposed to the specific students taught by an ATR teacher?
That's right, yes.
Okay, and is it correct to say that your conclusions around teacher retention and so forth similarly is about a school level retention, not about the retention of teachers that are in ATR roles?
That's right.
Okay, so I conclude from that this is a really good phase 1 report, but we've got to get to phase 2, as Ms. Kamnitz said, and I would hesitate to rush to standardization or limiting roles. We want our districts to experiment and innovate and carry the risk that some things may not work. But let's get to phase 2 of the report before we try to limit how districts are using this model, because they'll create ways to use it that we can never dream of because they're focused on meeting the needs of our kids. So, I don't know. I guess this is a report we've got to turn in pretty quickly, but personally, Dr. Oxendine, I would caveat this report as a phase 1 report with the need for a follow-up report to get you the data you need to answer Ms. Kamnitz's question.
Is that, thank you very much, and that leads us to my question to Dr. Tomberlin. Does that seem feasible?
It is feasible. So to give you some context of when the researchers started going into our ATR schools, they found that the majority of the schools were not collecting specific data on teachers who were participating in the program and how they were connected with the advanced teachers that were serving them, which is critical to understanding the question that you're raising. So early on in the year, we discovered this. If you'll recall, in the summer, we brought you a revised RFP. And really the only change in that RFP was districts shall collect and report data to the evaluation team in regard to this program. We had to put the districts on alert that they had to collect these data in order for us to make these kinds of inferences that we want to make. So in the meantime as well, I've been working with the Friday Institute and the EVOS team to develop the templates for data collection for the district, so they're very clear about what kinds of information we need, how they have to document and record this information in order for us to do this study. So, Chairman Davis, you're absolutely correct. This was not phase one because we only wanted to do phase one. It was phase one because the data itself limited us to this kind of analysis. But moving forward in this year, once we do the RFP process, we're going to convene all the ATR districts and make it clear to them what the expectations are in terms of data collection are moving forward. So,
sorry if I can ask follow-up. So we have data about individual student performance.
yes.
In these schools, and we know which teachers these students had for the given subject or period of time that the assessment
That is
covered.
correct.
Can we connect the teacher to an advanced teaching role? Is that the gap?
That's the gap. Actually, the teachers that were participating and at what level they were participating and which advanced teachers they were working with. That's the information that's missing. It wasn't missing in a couple of districts, but it was missing for the vast majority. So we just need to be very clear with districts about how when this can't be, what our fear is that there's this general working of an advanced teacher where they're needed, and it's kind of as a PRN. As the need arises, the teacher will work with another teacher. We need it to be more formalized, those relationships to be formalized and rostered in order for us to detect any kind of impact of the program.
Okay, so the question is, I think you're answering some of the questions that I had. You're talking about clarifying some of the limitations in the study.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that where we are right now? We're clarifying a limitation?
Yes. So what I would recommend is that DPI make a draft to include with this report that goes to the General Assembly, explaining the challenges of the analysis and how DPI is moving to establish formal reporting systems that would allow a more robust analysis of the program. And that way, we don't want to give the impression that ATR is not successful, because on many, many fronts, we're seeing that it is. I think the fear is that some of the quantitative data may not be telling the story we would like to tell about ATR. And so
that's going to be very important, because I want to emphasize again, so much of where we go next with the Pathways to Excellence is going to be, in my opinion, maybe just only my opinion, is going to be driven by the more we learn from these ATR studies. We will have good answers in your direction going forward. So my recommendation to you, Chair Davis, is that we remove it from the action on first reading and do what we're doing now. We're having a discussion. And if we could bring it back next month with the appendix or additional information to clarify the discussion we've had today around the methodology, so that the General Assembly members get it. I think that would be really good.
Okay, is there any objection to Dr. Oxendine's recommendation to move this to discussion with a follow-up in November, adding the commentary?
When is it due to
October 15th.
Talk about complications there. Can we make a request to the General Assembly to have another month, couple of months? Probably done this before. I think it's important.
I kind of have a track record, so.
Is it a good track record? Okay. What do you say?
We can do that, or conversely, I could have the addendum to the board before October 15th if we wanted to make the deadline. The report itself will not change, but the kind of the brief discussing the challenges of the data collection and how we're moving forward might be informative to the General Assembly.
So you could get that to us promptly so that board members could read and study?
Well, that would require another meeting. How about this? Why don't we send the report by the October 15th with a cover letter that says there's more coming, that we will add the commentary and addendum and so forth at our November meeting. That way we meet the timeline, but make clear to our General Assembly members that there's more coming.
I would say the challenge there is, will they read the more forthcoming, or will they?
Well, that's sort of a challenge no matter what we send them, huh?
That's right.
So what I'm hearing is that we were going to move forward with the report. There will be a clarifying piece to the report in terms of a more full explanation of our methodology of data collection and doing our analysis. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Ms. Kamens?
Could you not just include all that in the cover letter? Instead of saying there's more coming, just.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Cover letter
It should
that
be.
isn't part of the report, but a cover letter that says, here's what we
Yeah.
haven't.
Yes.
I think we would want to act on approve the cover letter.
Okay.
That's the
Yeah,
point.
gotcha.
I think
Okay.
we're wanting to make sure we approve the all-inclusive communication that goes to the General Assembly.
This is Dr. Donna
So
Tipton
we're
Rogers,
back
and
to
I
this.
would, sorry, I'm on the committee as well, and I totally agree. I think we do need to approve the cover letter before it goes. This is really important, and there are a lot of things that need to be made clear as we move forward.
All right, very good.
Well, Dr. Tom, if you're concerned that they may not read what follows, then should we just delay sending them the report so we send it to them one time?
So when we think about the State of the Teaching Profession report and the EPP report, we send over a report saying, due to data collection issues, the report is not available at this time. We will be resubmitting. So we are sending over a report that basically says nothing to meet the statutory deadline, but then we follow it up with the report that contains that information.
Let's do that.
Okay?
How about that, Dr. Oxenine?
Say that again?
So
Now I'm
So in our office, we call it a shell. We will send the shell, and in there indicate that the data are not ready to be included in the report. We'll take the extra month to bring back to you the report as it is, plus the addendum that the department will provide that you can vote on at that time.
So next month, this will be an action item.
Yeah, so we'll move this item to discussion formally in our
Yes.
agenda and records, and then bring it back in November for action.
Excellent.
Okay, so ordered. Back to you, Dr. Oxenine.
Okay, very good. I suppose I can move on with your way of thinking through this. The next item on the agenda is it is an action on first reading as well. And this is going to be presented by Dr. Steiberg, and we have a couple of community colleges coming forward, and they're going to be leveraging the framework the Department of Community Colleges approved a couple of years ago, and we certainly approved it, and these are requesting to operate or to operate as an EPP in the area of the elementary ed, special education, and you can take it from there.
Thank you, Dr. Oxenine. Good afternoon. Pitt and Robeson County community colleges are seeking EPP initial authorization status, and as Dr. Oxenine mentioned, that's under the same framework that was approved by this board back in June of 2022. They have applied and they have been approved by the State Board of Community Colleges, which is sort of the precursor step. And now that step has been taken, now that request comes before this board for formal approval. And this is the same process that we've applied for all the previous community college applications to date. These two community colleges would be offering a residency program route that leads to elementary licensure. This route requires candidates to already have an undergraduate degree, and it also leads to licensure and not a degree, right? So that's not what the community colleges are in the business of doing. These programs are also going to be held to the same accountability expectations and reporting obligations as any other authorized EPP as well. With the addition of these two community colleges, that would then bring the total number of approved community colleges across the state to a total of 21. Included in your materials for this item, we've also provided the institutional certification documents of each of the two community colleges, the approval summary from the State Board of Community Colleges, and a copy of their curriculum framework and standards, which were approved by you all back in 2022.
Very good. Any questions, comments? Thank you very much. We will act on this tomorrow. The next item is a discussion item. This is the ES&P presented to us, clarified by Dr. Evans. She is at the mic, and this has to do with a policy amendment to CTE, and it relates to the CTE cuts for EdTPA cut score. And you have it.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I just wanted to provide a reminder that first I had the legislative requirement for EdTPA, for the pedagogy assessment, and I just want to remind everyone that the two pedagogy assessments that are accepted within the state are EdTPA and PPAT. And today I'll be talking about EdTPA and the cut score for CTE. There's a new handbook that covers all of the CTE licensure areas, and this is for 15 rubrics, and the cut score that's proposed is 33. And this was also centered around a national standard score study that was provided by Pearson. So this is a vendor recommendation that was nationally normed.
Okay, any questions? Has Pepsi had a chance to peruse this?
Yes, they have. Yes, they have.
And
They have.
They're good with it?
They are good with the cut score.
Okay, very good. Is that the extent of your report?
That is the extent of my report, yes.
Thank you.
I will say that the field has had a question about the grace period that they need in order to prepare for this particular handbook, especially with CTE, since these licensure areas don't normally have testing, a pedagogy assessment. And so they need to be able to build their programs to handle the EdTPA as part of their coursework requirements.
Absolutely. So would Pepsi need to weigh in on that?
Yes, yes.
So then I would think this is going to have to go back to Pepsi.
I would
Their
agree.
work.
I would agree.
And they will submit
That-
through you or through someone.
Yes, so that would be added to the agenda for next week.
So, next week.
Yes.
Very good. And then probably next month we'll act on that recommendation. Is that
Yes, that is something that I can bring back for next month for action, yes.
And that's really the recommendation that we're talking about, is a recommendation about some period of time for our EPPs to prepare to make this change in their curriculum, to adapt to this change in the.
Right, right, exactly.
Very good. Questions?
So there is a cut score now, we're just changing it? Or-
No, this is the proposed cut score that Pepsi did recommend. But what the field is asking for, what EPPs are asking for, and there's 16 EPPs with CTE programs, is to be able to then be able to prepare for the CTE EdTPA test within their coursework to provide that support for the test.
Okay, so this is the first time that there's going to be a cut score. Okay.
Yes, 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 yes.
Thank you.
It's the time that the EPPs need to make the
Right,
transition.
right.
Very good. Anything else that we need to know about this item?
No, thank you.
And no questions, no comments. That concludes my report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now move to business operations led by Vice Chair Duncan. Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. along with John Blackburn. We lead the Biz Ops Committee, and we have several items today. The first two are action on first read. Biz Op 1 is approval of contracts over $500,000. We will bring these matters back to the board tomorrow. We will have a closed session and discussion with our council this afternoon before we discuss these items fully in tomorrow's meeting. Biz Op 2 is our next item, which is a cooperative agreement with the North Carolina Department of Justice and the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction with respect to our workers' compensation claims. And Allison Schaefer, who's had a number of appearances today, will have yet another.
I think I've appeared in every committee so far. This is an agreement. This is very short. It's an agreement with the Department of Justice that allows us to have workers' compensation attorneys representing the districts statewide, districts and schools statewide, and including DPI in workers' compensation cases. We provide coverage for all the districts. There's a local piece of that, but generally it's run by the Department of Justice, and this is just a continuation. There are two separate contracts. It used to be one separate contract with the education attorneys who work for us, but this we asked them to break it out because this is administered by Eileen Townsend in her department governing the workers' comp. So this is a contract over $500,000. Ask the board's approval. We have to do it, so it's not overly discretionary, and we have 3 attorneys that we pay for and a paralegal from that department, and they basically work full-time for us.
Thank you. And Allison, if you would just stick there for a moment, are there any questions or comments about this? This covers the claims statewide, so it is actually a very sizable amount of work that's involved. We now move to our action items, and Biz Op 3 is the rules updating final approval of the temporary rule relating to the paid parental leave with just a little bit of additional work on that. And Allison and Ryan.
And Ryan is going to handle that because I've been up here enough. Thank you.
Very good. Ryan, welcome to see a new face.
It's nice to be talking to you about something other than athletics for once. So what you have before you is the final proposed final temporary rule for the paid parental leave policy. If you recall, Allison back in August presented the proposed rule, which then had to go through public notice and comment period. We have made some recommended changes to that rule based in part on the public comment, but also pursuant to some recent changes to the enabling legislation that were included in the appropriations bill. So I'm going to briefly highlight some of those changes. I think you all have a track changes copy as well as a clean copy. First changes, there were a couple. We defined continuous and intermittent leave in the definition section. That'll become relevant a little bit later on. The next change was in Part B, makes a change. Originally, the teacher had to have at least 12 hours or 12 months of service with the PSU with whom they were working at the time. The General Assembly modified the law requiring that that period of service to cover all employment by a state entity offering this leave. So if the individual goes from one public school unit to another, or goes from, say, DPI into a school system or vice versa, from DPI to a school system, then the service in the previous employer would count towards that. So this was reflected a change in the law, but is also consistent with a lot of the feedback we had from the public of teachers that were concerned about losing this benefit because they had moved school districts. The next change is really more about clarification. It indicates that that a break in service does not include any period in which the employee was absent due to military service. That's consistent with federal law called the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act that guarantees certain benefits to be retained by individuals who provide military service. And number 5, we also thought it was important to clarify for the purposes of that transition from one public employer to another that the period of time that they're in transitioning, because we know that most people are not leaving a job one day and immediately starting the new job the next day. Any period up to 31 days in which they are unemployed transitioning from one job to another will not count as a break in service. And that 31 days is consistent with the provision of the benefits manual for vacation leave and whether it's cashed out versus transferred. Moving down to section F, or paragraph F, clarifies, and this was something that was requested for clarification from a lot of the local school district attorneys, is that if an employee uses paid parental leave and they have FMLA leave that's available to them, it will run, the use of the paid parental leave will count towards that FMLA leave, provided that the individual has provided those notice requirements. That's actually required under the federal regulations governing FMLA, but thought it was important to clarify that in the rule itself. And then under section G, this is really, I think, a clarification of what was the board's intent all along, but there were some questions from the field asking for verification that an individual does not have to have approval from their PSU in order to delay the use of intermittent leave, so if they don't want, or delay their use of paid parental leave, so if they want to wait and take it later, sometime after the qualifying event, or if they want to take it on an intermittent basis, so that is less than taking the entire 4 to 8 weeks to which they're entitled all at once, then they may do so, and the school districts are supposed to work with them to effect that request. So those are the changes being put forth to the board with recommendations for approval. If that happens, we will put it forth to the Office of Administrative Hearings with the intent that the rule be in effect on November 7th.
Any questions or comments? It's not the most fascinating topic we have, but it's an extremely important topic to get right. And so, Ryan, we particularly appreciate the attention to detail you've given to this throughout. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Dr. Tomberlin, he was going to be here with some conforming changes to the benefits manual.
Yes,
so
he was up next. Are you going to, is he still here? Or?
I think he may have stepped out, so.
Can you handle those?
I will do my best. I worked with him on him, so sure. If Maria, if you could pull that up.
It's again on the paid parental leave issues.
Yeah.
These have gone hand in hand as we've discussed them for the last several meetings.
So nothing too significant. Really, it's just there's been changes. He's updated the benefits manual in order to reflect those two changes, particularly the portability issue that they can count service in other school districts and other state employers towards that 12-month service requirement, and the fact that the employee may take the leave at their leisure without having to have approval from the school district. So as far as I know, those are the only two changes to the benefits manual.
Clarifies that intermittent leave provision. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions or comments on this? All right, Ryan, thank you very much. Double duty. This op 5 is the right of entry and easement. We had some discussion on this the last time. Nathan Mon is here to present this, and I know he invited representatives of the Department of Administration of Duke Energy, and I believe some of the Duke Energy folks may be here, and we appreciate their presence. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. This item was before you last month as a discussion item. Excuse me. As you know, the North Carolina School for the Deaf is requesting the authority to provide an easement, permanent easement for Duke Energy and the right of entry to construct and maintain an underground electric power conductor through their campus in conjunction with project installations that will cross their campus boundary and also be located on the Science and Math School campus in Morganton, as well as the Broughton Hospital campus adjacent. So these three state-owned facilities are part of the request, part of this project. The other two campuses have granted their right of entry for construction and easement authority, and so we're requesting that. Since our last meeting, had additional conversations with campus leadership at the deaf school, and they have reaffirmed that this route is what they prefer. There's an option that could be exercised if this easement is not approved, that it would entail some above ground utilities and some more impacts on the campus on the main street frontages. So they much prefer the selected route. They've chosen it carefully to avoid any disruption or destruction of 100-year-old oak trees. That's their phrase. There are some pretty prominent older hardwood trees on this campus that contribute significantly to the character of the place, and they very much don't want to disturb those either on the main road frontages or within the campus footprint where this underground work would happen. They've also navigated the route between a couple of existing athletic fields, such that they feel like it's the minimal impact to their operations. We also have discussed work restrictions for any contractors working on the site. That set of work requirements would be included in any contracts. Any work going on this site would be required to comply with those background checks and other requirements that the school holds for any contractor doing work on their facility. So we would request support of this, approval of this in tomorrow's vote.
All right, are there questions or comments? So have we worked with our legal department as to what the contract language would look like in order to protect our students? Because we have a particularly vulnerable student population at this campus who have hearing issues as well as other related issues. So the exception of the children are particularly vulnerable and in need of protection. So do we know where we are in terms of any legal discussion at this point of
Yeah, we've had
suitable terms?
meetings internally about that. You want to add anything else?
If you prefer, we actually had a motion drafted up that we can add to the motion tomorrow that specifically says what those are going to be, if you would like to include that in the motion for tomorrow. It basically is to make sure the background checks are completed and that there are safety precautions taken to make sure that students with disabilities, that there's a particular safeguards for those.
I think we would want that as part of any motion.
Okay,
yes.
I will get that to you this afternoon.
Okay, and if I could ask the Duke Energy representative to come forward, if you'd be kind enough to do that.
We have 3 representatives, 2 with the technical engineering aspects and then a real estate representative. So this is Jay White. Jay.
Jay, welcome, and thank you again for being here.
Thank y'all for having
Have you
us.
seen these provisions that are in the proposed motion?
The provisions of the work provisions for any contractors.
Oh, yes.
That is, if we pass the motion, it's going to be contingent on that being approved by Duke Energy.
Yes, we've already got 3 crews ready to implement this program and this job right now. We already know who they're going to be and everything, so they're ready for us to either say yes or no.
Are they ready to sign off?
Yes.
Whoever would sign off on this contract language?
Yes.
All right, and so probably the other fundamental question the board has had is, well, our understanding is this is a total of 1.4 acres that would be involved in this easement?
Yes, from point A to point B, it's over 8,000 some feet, but it's all going to be underground boring. There's going to be minimal digging in that area. But yes, 1.4 acres of total.
I hope you appreciate this question comes from the standpoint, these are public lands, they're sensitive because of the nature of the school we have there, and I think you now appreciate why we're protective of our students there.
Yes.
And it's uncommon in our experience that there would not be some payment made for an easement of that type and the level of inconvenience that it may create for the users of the property. Can you shed any light on why that would be here?
Anything we do to this property will be put back like it is or better than what it is. We do have to dig what we call splice pits to put these boxes in. And wherever we dig, we will fix that back and make sure that at our expense.
And my understanding is you would have to come back periodically at a minimum for maintenance of some of those boxes that are being put in.
If by chance that they settle, the dirt settles around them, whatever, we will come back to that, but it would be probably a Duke representative that does that, or a Duke crew that does that. And if by nature itself, we can't control nature and the power goes out or whatever, or something happens to that cable in those boxes, yes, we would have to come back to fix that. But that would be a Duke crew itself that does that.
Okay, you're with Duke though, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, can I suggest that eventuality is covered, that those people, whoever might have to come on in that situation, would also be aware of the limitations and appropriate restrictions about who should be on the property?
Yes, but I guess the way it's operated is if we have an outage like at night,
we got different people that takes those shifts. So, it's hard to say that, yes, this one person is gonna be here every time that it goes out or whatever.
I hear that, but unlike most of our schools, this is a residential school, so these students are there at night also.
Right, but we would take care of the people that we're gonna have associated with this project. We would take care of them knowing that they have to do a background and all that.
Right, that seems to me that might require a little advanced planning, that's why I'm raising it.
Yes.
All right, and with respect to, is it not common for Duke to pay some amount of money for easements of this size?
Greg Van Hoos with Duke Land Services. For distribution easements, we do request that for those easements to be donated because it helps the public in large. If we had to always pay for those distribution easements, it would affect our rates and effectively the consumer itself. Does that help?
Consumer defined here how?
Ratepayers for Duke, because it's distribution services.
Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
So
Superintendent.
can you clarify how this will help the general public?
Sure. Jay, Lydia?
There's 3 ways this can help. It can help the Broughton Hospital, the School of the Deaf, and the customers around them. What this is going to be is a tie line that's going to be between Broughton Hospital and the other side of Chambers, which is Chambers Substation, which is the School of the Deaf. If one section of this line goes out on the Broughton Hospital side, we would be able to backfeed this and get the hospital, the school, and everybody else back on without power, in a quicker amount of time. Without this tie point, when it ever goes out, whatever the problem is, we're going to have to fix that before anybody gets back on. This is a project we've been working on for a couple of years now, and it is very valuable that we try to get this tie line built to better serve our customers and keep the school and Broughton on, or the hospital on, if something was to happen on either end of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, let me thank y'all again very much for being here with us at the meeting and helping respond to these questions and fill out the picture a little bit better for the board. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions for Nathan? All right. That will conclude this item. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have 3 consent items. Biz Op 6 is a report to North Carolina General Assembly on the cooperative purchasing report. Dr. Sandberg's here if there's any questions. This report is an annual report in which we try to demonstrate that by having cooperative purchasing powers, able to save the state some money, and that's what the report is about. Biz Op, and I'll stop in case there are any questions about it. Biz Op 7 is a report to the General Assembly on full-time equivalency of public school students. This annual report, we spent some time on this last year, which was the first year of the annual report. We talked about it last month as a discussion item. Jennifer Bennett is here and ready to go with the report along with Dr. Rob Dietrich. Unless there are any questions that have come up since our discussion, this is a consent item that's ready to move forward and will become a standard annual report. And finally, Biz Op 8 is a report to the North Carolina General Assembly to limit local Board of Education waivers. And basically, we're reporting on the waivers that the state board is allowed to authorize, and they fall under 2 categories. One is class size, and the second one is calendar waivers. So those waivers that have been authorized for districts because of the statutory language and past cancellations created by weather, those are all listed there. And then class sizes are listed by district and individual classroom in school in terms of those places where it's been authorized, and that's fully included in that report, which you will find to be interesting reading if that's something you want to find more about. I did say if. Finally, we have updates on contracts, both executed and planned. Have not heard any questions on those, but I'll stop. Are there any questions? And then we have the monthly budget report set out. Have not heard any questions on that, but I'll pause in case anyone has a question on that. Not seeing any. That completes our report. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. That concludes our discussions for today. Before going into closed session, I'll remind our audience that we will not be returning to open session after our closed meeting, but we will reconvene tomorrow, October 5th, promptly at 9 a.m. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318.11, A1, 3, and 6, and to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Sections 115C-318 and 321, and North Carolina General Statute, Section 132-6.1C, etc. To consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or condition of appointment of public officers or employees or prospective public officers or employees, and to consult with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including a discussion of the following pending cases: Brown versus North Carolina DPI, Locklear versus Diggs, Classical Charter Schools versus North Carolina DPI, Hall versus Lyles, and Henderson versus North Carolina State Board of Education and North Carolina DPI.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Blackburn. Any discussion? Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan, Yes. Mr. Hull,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. Let's be enclosed at 3:45 in the conference room. We're adjourned.